Hello, YouTube. Welcome to Bottom of the Smash Mountain, a podcast focused around Melee, hosted by Jesse Wall, aka Cypher, aka me. That's me talking. Yes, that's right. I am the host of this whole thing, and I am the one who is trying to upload all the interviews I've ever done on my podcast onto YouTube. I am aware of how much access YouTube may or may not provide. Hopefully a lot for those of you who are more YouTube-focused platform users. Maybe you don't like listening to podcasts on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or Podcast Addict or Podbean or many of the other podcasting platforms. There's apparently more than just 3. The point is that if you don't want to listen to a podcast but you want to watch a video of a picture, maybe have it in a separate tab while you continue to browse the internet, now you can do it through YouTube. So hope you continue to listen, and thanks for watching. Here we are, bottom of the Smash Mountain, and today I'm so happy to be joined by a cat named Virtue, who does all kinds of fun stuff around Melee and within Melee, and we will get into all that. But V, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me here, Jesse.
Really appreciate you taking the time because you have a pretty busy schedule by the looks of your Twitter. We'll definitely have that linked in the description of the podcast of this episode, by the way, Twitter and whatever else. We'll get to that at the end, but just in case anyone's listening and is not already dropping a follow, please drop a follow. So at cat named _V on Twitter, you definitely seem to keep yourself busy around Melee. Is that true, or do you feel like it's more of, it's not that much? Like, what would you say your mentality is behind how much you do around Melee?
I feel like I kind of dip my toes into like a little bit of a ton of things, and the more that those things like fulfill me, like giving me something to do and something that feels rewarding and meaningful to the community, I'll like kind of dive into that thing deeper and more. Like, if I'm doing tournament organizing and it feels like it's really going well, I'll kind of invest in that thing. If I'm doing commentary and it feels like a lot of events are enjoying having me there or it's being well received, I kind of invest in that. There's like pulls in a bunch of directions.
Yeah, I can see that you're saying to yourself, if I'm having a good time, if other people are having a good time, increase that output. And I feel like sometimes there might be this feeling where it sort of ebbs and flows. You sort of made it sound like that as time goes on and as things sort of shift, that you'll say, so I'm going to lean into this a little bit more now. Would you say that's true, or have you decided, I'm pretty set on how I like to participate in Melee?
Yeah, that's kind of like a tricky thought, because like I definitely kind of like lean towards whatever thing feels like it's rewarding me and the people around me the best. But I've also like taken like huge just like breaks from doing certain things. Like before quarantine, like it's tournament organizing is like the first thing that comes to mind, but like I used to host like Smash Fests at my apartment or my house or wherever I was living at the time. I would host them all the time. Like that's really how I got like started in Smash. Which over time developed like me going, I should just run some tournaments. And I ran a couple of tournaments when I started, one of which was like at my own house, which was like it was like a monthly sized event we would do, called In the Garage. And that was a really, really cool event. And I know a lot of people really, really liked it from our region because it was something we didn't really have. Like our only other real locals were like one bar local and our Melee at Epic, like the card shop classic big local, right? And after that, and like we moved out of that house, I just didn't like run a tournament for like, I ran like one small one in like a year and a half. So like I just kind of didn't TO for that whole time. And then I'd even stepped away from the game for like half a year and kind of returned during quarantine, and I was like, I'm just going to TO an online event. And now I run a weekly event called Pink Tournament. I should really say it's twice a week, because we recently just started doing doubles as well as like its own event. And that's kind of how it's a pull from every side. Like the more it feels like the doubles community grows, I start doing more doubles events and I start playing more doubles, or I start doing that and I like my attention's drawn to it. Yeah, I don't know. It really is like a pull from each side where I'll move over to things really quickly.
But aside from doing the behind the scenes things that you do, you are also a player, a competitor. And the first time that I heard and saw you playing was for 5 Days of Melee, as I recall. So you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there was Smash Sisters events happening during 5 Days of Melee, right?
Yeah, actually. I had like just gotten involved in doing Smash Sisters like the month prior to that, and they had asked me to do that one, which was pretty big, and it was my first time ever being involved with an event of that scale, actually. Like, I thought that was really, really cool. But yeah, 100%. I was on the Smash Sisters crew battle. I got my butt beat by Chia really, really hard, I think, in that event. Yeah, that was a very cool one. I've also been involved in Smash Sisters, and I've done Gale as well. It's so interesting to hear about this, to think about it even for myself now. I'm like, wow, I've dipped my toes into so many different facets of like different communities and different things.
And then, of course, it was a pleasure to see you around the Alston Melee Bender as well, helping to commentate and that sort of thing. I'm also trying to come up with an excuse that I can throughout my podcast to shout out Alston Melee, just because Alston Melee is a big inspiration for what I'm doing here. So thank you, Alston Melee. But it sounds like for sure that you do all kinds of things, but you said that bi-weekly is not quite accurate, because you made it sound like that your Pink tournament series is once a month for singles and once a month for doubles. Does that sound right?
So for Pink tournament, it's like every week we have a doubles event and a singles event right now. We've been going 30 tournaments strong. As of last night was the 30th one, 30 weeks in a row. Started last winter, and we've only like skipped like 2 weeks total. But we just started doing doubles, so we actually have it's basically a tournament every 3 days there now.
Every 3 days? Ooh, that's
basically, I mean, like 3 days and then 4 days, then 3 days, right? Because it's a doubles one and then singles. We've been doing doubles now. I literally announced today that we're doing doubles at Pink 4, which is on Friday night. And everything is usually, like, as soon as one's over, I announce the next one. And then once that one's over, I announce the next one. It's like in a constant loop. It's a lot of work, actually, because also for the kind of gimmick of our dumb tournament, right? It's a free tournament for everybody, right? It's West Coast, but it's free for everyone. I just draw a really bad little doodle, like in Photoshop, of the winner's like character usually, and I do that for singles and doubles. And I'm not really an artist, so it takes me a long time. It's really hard.
Did I lose you, V, or are you still here?
Nope. I was just giving you space.
Oh, thank you. I really do appreciate that. And I'm also trying to make sure that I'm giving that to you as well. But then, of course, I'm using a phone with data, so I actually have dropped calls before, so I'm trying to figure that out. Yeah.
Got it.
Hearing about how you're doing all these little extra things, trying to, well, what is the motivation behind it, do you think? And I know that's probably a hard question to think about and answer on the fly, but I hear you talking about doing all these different things, and I think I am coming back to why, more or less. But to give you time to sort of let that bake, maybe I can say we'll come back to it and sort of go backwards a little bit to the beginning. Does that sound good to you?
Yeah, let's go ahead.
So when did Melee become more of a thing in your life? Like you probably knew about the game at a certain point in time, younger age, but when did you start to consider it seriously as being part of the community and playing and all that stuff?
Yeah. So of course I played as a kid. I remember it like came out when I was really, really young, and me and my friends all loved it. I have vivid memories of remembering when Brawl came out and we all tried to play that, and like half our friends just were like, this one isn't as good. And we didn't really have the comprehension to understand why, right? But like, we all felt that, and I remember that. And as I kind of returned to it, I had just gotten out of high school, and me and my like friends and roommates at the time, were just like, whatever random reason, we used to keep a GameCube in our living room because our apartment would all play Animal Crossing together, right? So we had like a shared GameCube that we would all like play every day, right? To play Animal Crossing. And we're just like, oh, well, we already have the TV out here and the GameCube. Like, let's just play Melee. And we're just doing like free-for-alls. And like, one of our friends worked at Burger King, and that he like mentioned, oh, I'm trying to get out tonight because me and my friends and roommates are going to go play Smash Bros. And this other person at his work goes, which one? And of course, that person was like a Melee player, right? And so they came over and they beat us all really hard. And we all thought it was just so cool that the game could be played that way. And like to see somebody who's so good at it. And that just sort of got us hooked immediately. Like all of us started playing 1v1 matches instead on the tournament legal stages, or at least as close as we could think of. And yeah, I was a Yoshi main when I started, and I did that for like, went to my first tournament in the beginning of 2015, and for like 2 years I just mained Yoshi, and I didn't take it super duper seriously. Didn't go to like a ton of events. Just sort of played with like my same friends, and like would go to the locals or whatever. And then it was the first Don't Park on the Grass I went to, actually, that I like went to that tournament, and I was like pretty dedicated. I was already in like the character crisis of like changing character, and maybe I want to take the game more seriously. There was a old Melee streamer who I don't really want to name drop, who was like really influential to me, and like saying, maybe what do I want out of Melee, right? Like, what do I want out of it? So it was really interesting that you said that about like the TOing stuff, because I've thought about it a lot, actually. And I was like, what do I want? I think I want to take the game more seriously. And it's not that I don't think Yoshi was good. I was like, I have all these bad habits, and instead of unlearning them just for the sake of still playing Yoshi, I'll just find a new character. And I was like, Don't Park is going to be like my last hurrah as a Yoshi player. And then I left that tournament as a Puff player, and that's where I'm at today. And
so
after that, yeah, it just kind of went one thing to another. Once I became like a Puff player, I just got like more invested in like improving, which led me to be more community involved, right? Like I would know a lot more people, start doing running tournaments at that point, hosting for other people all the time. And just, yeah, I don't remember how it was. Like it's kind of history in my head.
Well, certainly, and valuable history, because that Don't Park on the Grass event made you the Puff player that you are today. But I'm curious as to if you remember any sort of moment where something switched, or if it was a game you were playing against somebody else, a friendly, or even a tournament set at Don't Park on the Grass that made you think, actually, yes, Puff, because there are enough characters to choose from in Melee, especially if you're willing to deviate away from the top tiers. It doesn't have to be Fox or Falco or Marth. And Jigglypuff, of course, is high tier as well. I'm not trying to say otherwise. But what I'm saying is, did you have any specific memory that you can think of that led you to Puff, or is it all just far enough back in history for you?
No, I do. So it wasn't like I've never been like I've never hated Floaties. I've never like disliked a character really. So I didn't have like that Puff hate. I just like our local scene didn't really have any Jigglypuff players, or like any that were like prominent. So like I never really thought about her. And I remember I was like, oh, maybe I'll play Sheik, maybe I'll play Falcon. Like I mained both those characters for like a week or whatever, right? Where I was trying to be really serious. Fox. And then I went to Don't Park, and I still was like, this is gonna be the last time I play as Yoshi, right? And I went with my friends, and the Australian player Phrase, who was currently living in Oregon, we went together. And we were just in like a hotel room playing Melee, and we're like, oh, let's play doubles. And Phrase told me, V, I just don't want to play doubles with Yoshi. You got to pick another character right now. And I was like, okay, who do you want me to play? Like, you know, they're my friend. They know I like don't have my character picked out, right? I'm not nearly as good as a Melee player at this time. And he just said, have you played Puff? You might like that character. And that was really it. And then I just loved that double session. Was like the first time I really played Puff, and was like, my more experienced friend was just telling me, oh, do this, it's good. And I would go, oh, that is good. And then I would just like Puff. And then I stuck to it. And I played Puff the rest of the weekend at the tournament. And stuck to it.
Your love of Floaties is definitely not missed. Well, partially because you helped me with the research by telling me this before we started recording. But also your pinned tweet. I love this pinned tweet. I'm just going to read it. If you can't handle me at my Twitter thought posting, then you don't deserve me at my 285th ledge grab. Heart emoji. I love that.
Yeah, that's a really good way to wrap me up.
It's a great pinned tweet. It's better than mine. And I'm thinking about how you seem to be, because you play Puff, you obviously have to lean into that floaty floaty is not stereotype. That's not the right word, but there is a certain amount of playing the game a tad slower that you have to, of course, respect and know and play intentionally as a floaty. That rush down and playing fast and playing aggressive is not always the move. But what would you consider to be something that, if you were trying to describe how you play to somebody like me on a podcast in front of other people, how would you describe the way that you play without actually seeing gameplay itself? Like, how would you describe it just with words?
Yeah. So I actually think it's kind of like a meme, I think. Like, a lot of people have a funny impression of me because of like a couple of sets, or like maybe like I play into it, right? You mentioned like you'll play into like the stereotypes of like floaties, and I totally will. I may have at one point when I started Puff wanted to be like the cool Puff player, you know? Like, this is why I was like, actually, I was very inspired by Fire Puff, who you've had on here before.
Shout out
inspired
to
by
Firepuff
Old
12.
Mango, King, right? Shout outs to Firepuff 12. I thought all those were really cool. And at some point, this thing happened where for the last game of a set, I like comboed into an offstage rest, and this Fox star KO'd, and I died first.
No.
And I lost the set. And I was like, wow. And then later that day, I watched Vino DH go down a game versus Eggs, the Fox player, and like kind of my tutor at the time. And Eggs is up in games, and Vino realizes, wait, you don't know how to get me off the ledge. And then Vino ledge camps the remaining 3 games and like wins the whole set. And I was like, I'm changed now. I will never lose for trying to be cool again. And my other friend, she's a Peach player. Her tag is Outlet, or Outlet 7, I guess sometimes. She said a thing that really was like the nail in the coffin for it, right? Where she's like, there's always that thing in Melee that you'll do, and you'll think like, wow, I wish I didn't do that thing in the game, right? I didn't have the discipline. And like, that was why I lost, right? And my thought was, I will never feel that feeling again if I just commit to what I want to do. So when I want to explain my playstyle, I don't like to just say, I want to camp and I want to be lame, because that's true a lot, right? I consider myself a pretty lame player by most metrics, but I actually think it's very hot and cold. Where like, sometimes I just want to do whatever I think is the best thing to do to win, and I will try to like get in people's heads. I think it's important. And sometimes the best way to get in somebody's head is to be incredibly aggressive. Sometimes it's to throw out every rest I possibly have. And like, sometimes you do that and then you just camp, and they're like, what happened? I thought I figured out the tempo of this. Like, maybe you camp a whole first game and you time out, and they think you're like, you're messing with me. This is a joke. And then the next game, I don't do it at all. I really think of it that way. And I think what comes up is that I'll really be out here and I'll time out somebody for multiple games in a row. And the impression will be just that I am trying to camp and be lame, and they don't like that. But it's not like for the impression of that. I just think it's like, it's a powerful tool to like control the tempo like that in either direction. But I think it's a lot more polarizing for people when you do the can't be lame things, when I'll ledge camp for an entire set, when I'll circle camp on Dreamland for 6 minutes. I think that's a lot more polarizing for people.
Yes, I'm thinking of the spacey mains through and through who just can't possibly understand that concept of trying to actually avoid interaction as compared to leaning into the interaction within a Melee game. And my question is, from your perspective, and I'm not trying to paint you as a 100% complete expert in all things of Melee, but you have played enough that I feel confident in you saying that you know at least enough to answer this question of, in your opinion, being who can control the tempo of a match better than Puff? Because honestly, I think it might be Puff that's the best controller of the tempo in a game or in a set, but I'm curious as to what you think about that.
Yeah, I think that it's there's some more complex interactions, I think, between specific characters, like in certain matchups. But I think that I might agree, the people who control the pace of a game, like in my view, I don't know if I think Puff is number one, but she's probably up there with Falco. Falco is also really known for like being able to set the tempo of a match a lot, I think, because of like laser game. Puff's ability is like she can slow it down immensely and try to avoid things, but like certain characters can really force that interaction at some point. So I don't know. Like when I look at Fox Puff, I actually don't think of like Puff setting the pace for it. It's kind of Fox deciding what do I want to work for with lasers or with like threat ranges until I want to commit to the option, I think. I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, I'm following along a little bit. I was also trying to think of, while you were answering, I was also trying to think of, is Marth also good at controlling the pace? Just because Marth can definitely plank the ledge really well also. But I liked what you said about specific matchups tending to present the strength of a character's ability to slow down a game, and it's not just like a one-size-fits-all for Puff specifically. But I've watched enough of Puff. Oh boy, I said Puff and Fox at the same time, but I've watched enough of Jigs and Fox playing against each other, regardless of who's behind the controller for each character, that if the Fox plays the matchup really well, it does feel like they're controlling the pace of the game more than the Puff is. Even if the Puff is trying to assert a slower tempo, somehow the Fox can just get in and get the up throw up air, all that kind of stuff. And
I agree. Like it's so much tied into like whoever the thing is in Melee, when you get the lead, that you've earned your like privilege to be campy if you want. You can now make the other person have to create the they have to come at you, right?
Yes, yeah, I understand what you're saying. And playing with a lead, that's something that you'll definitely do if you feel like you need to. I really liked how you said you will change how slow you want to play a game, even within a set, going from game 1 to game 2 or game 2 to game 3, if it's best of 5, so on and so forth. And I'm curious as to the other part of what you said, where you're not going to lose because you were trying to go for the style, for the cool points. Like, you will play quote-unquote lame, but really you're playing to win, so that is fair. Would you find more satisfaction in winning, doing whatever it takes to get there, staying disciplined, playing slower, ledge camping, circle camping, as compared to winning by doing the cool thing? If you happen to get an offstage rest in the future and something cool really happens like that, would you say to yourself, well, actually, that wasn't as cool as I thought it was going to be. I'd really rather just circle camp and win that way?
It's like I definitely acknowledge things like when they're like quote unquote the cool things in Melee, right? I appreciate those things too. But I think there's like truly an art in Melee to like appreciating all of its depth, I think. And I think that like the lame things in Melee truly still have a lot of interactive depth, whether that's like playing for a timeout or what. Like, I actually don't really care. Like, if I end a game with a cool combo, right? That feels good. But it equally feels good to me to like time out a game at 2 stocks to 1 and they just can't catch me. Like, it doesn't really matter to me. Like, I think what is the fun thing for me, or like what makes it cool to me, is like asserting your will as a competitor over your opponent in whatever way that needs to happen. And sometimes, like, if it's the really cool way, like, you get like that really cool combo like Nun does, and you kind of assert your will that's like, look, I can do this and I will just destroy you. And that's what you need, right? I don't know. I think both are very cool and very valuable in Melee. And I think that like going for either one of them can be like a thing that you find like ownership of and like strength in, and it's cool both ways. What makes stuff cool is that there is stuff that is lame, right?
Yeah, there has to be lame stuff in order for us to all appreciate the cool stuff. You're right. And so I'm also thinking of another question that I slipped out of my head here, but here's a question for you. In terms of the content realm, which is something that you stream the Pink tournament series, so you are definitely aware of how much of a thing that is around Melee. Have you ever seen, it's okay if you haven't. Have you ever seen the Melee Stats podcast video on their YouTube channel of Michael versus Bananas, the Ices versus Puff set where they didn't move for an entire game on FD? Like they hardly touched their controllers at all for 8 minutes straight. Did you watch that video?
Yeah, I have seen that video. As a slight catch up to this one, Michael 41 billion is my favorite player. So I'm pretty familiar with it. And yeah, what else did you want to ask about it? I am familiar with it though.
Oh, I'm just making sure that you were familiar with it. Yes, and is that the kind of video that you really enjoy watching just because you know some of the ins and outs of that sort of thing and it's really close to you? Or would you say you really enjoy watching things like None, who can go on the Slippy Unranked and just find a poor soul who might have only been playing for a few weeks, stock them and go, oh, you just got bonded. GG's. Because it's totally different than what you're normally trying to do most of the time. Like, do you know what I mean?
I do, and I absolutely love I absolutely love watching that Michael kind of situation. Where was it? I actually even, it's funny that you said that. You're like, oh, was that like a video you really liked? And here I am, and I really remember messaging Gimme.Wheat and just saying, I really loved that new video from you. About how much I love that they put that together. Uh-huh. And was like, that's it. Well, it was so insightful because I think a lot of people didn't understand, like, don't understand, maybe even still, like, how do you get to that point, and like, what is it that is actually fueling those players for like to behave that way, right? I think maybe an even better example of that set of like what happened there is actually to talk about the Fohibra versus Chango set at Battle BC3, because it was a little bit more of an understandable scenario of like, both of these players are trying to play to win, right? And Chango is simply playing to the rules of the game to like play lame to win. And there's definitely like these levels of like rivalry or spite to it, right? But like being able to do that and succeed in that, I think is really cool in its own ways. And like the Michael and Banana situation was just, I think, the most extreme we've ever seen that interaction happen in Melee, where like both these players thought the actual best thing to do in the moment was to not have the interaction happen so they could get whatever advantage they wanted. Like, I've heard, I don't know how true it is, like the rumor that like Bananas did it to try to get them both DQ'd. But like, I don't think Michael for a moment in his heart thought, I'm just trying to get us DQ'd or to like not play the game, right? The goal was to win, I think. And like, if the best thing you can get was, oh, awesome, if we time out here, then someone will have a counter pick, right? And like, now it's favorable to do something, which is more or less what happened in that set, right?
Yes, and it is a great video that offers insight into why both of those players ended up into that situation, and to say, you know what, that's Melee too. And maybe you don't have to embrace it fondly with loving arms and go, that's my Melee, but it is part of the game that you love. I love that there are more content pieces out there which sort of talk about the floaty side of things, or perhaps the lame side of things. This might not be the best example, but I do occasionally think back to Emperor Lemon's documentary on Hungrybox, and there was a certain point in the video where it was like Melee players that are all about the spacies and that sort of thing love the game, and yet somehow within the little sphere of the game there's this tiny little dot, and it was just personified by a tiny little Pikachu hidden inside of a $sign or something. It was so funny to me. But just developing that appreciation, it's not something that I had for a while, where I was going, well, the faster the character moves, the cooler it is, and I don't understand what's going on. And I think that is the key thing, that you aren't actually able to comprehend what's happening on screen. Just like everything else in Melee, a new person may not realize how cool it is that a stomp knee happens or a sacred combo. That's like the most easily viewable experience, I feel like, for a newer person, but that still might not be cool right away, where they're going, okay, they got popped up and then they got hit by a strong attack, who cares? But we're all, losing our minds and whatever else, because that's what happens when you watch Captain Falcon. But I think that has a large part of why somebody who understands the spacey side of Melee having a harder time understanding the floaty side just because they fell in love with that part first. But you have a lot of things to fall in love with the floaty side as well, or at least that's my opinion. But did you have any other thoughts about it?
I just think it's like Melee, like, you're right. That, by the way, I wanted to note that the Hungry Box video that Emperor Lemon did is like one of my favorite YouTube videos of all time. It's a great video, right? Like, it really hits home for me. Like, I'm not like the biggest HBox fan in the world, right? You have to appreciate somebody who like made your character, right?
Right.
But like, I don't really care that much about HBox as a person or like his like story all that much. But I thought that video was really cool because it is like a lot of the HBox hate that exists is around like this playstyle thing that I really think about going like, why, I guess, right? It's like, there's so many cool things in Melee and not everything has to be fast. There's so many different ways to appreciate it. Like, it's so many different like degrees. And I think it's crazy that people only want to appreciate like the Spaceys, the Captain like Falcon stuff. Like, we even see people who like, you know, the mass Marth hate that exists now, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, that's always so weird to me because it's like, why do you want to engage in this game for like 3 characters out of the cast? Like, even though they might not be your favorite things, Luigi's in this game. Like, Jigglypuff, the Ice Climbers, Marth, Sheik, they're all in this game too. And they have such diverse and distinct interactions with the game and the other characters. Like, I personally think that they're really, really cool. And not only that, I think that the way some of these characters interact with like the way the game works is really, really cool.
And I love that there was a development of like the 20XX stuff, but one of it was so funny when Emperor Lemon's video was like, yeah, well, what about the 20FF era? And it's true, like with Jigglypuff, and it's thanks to the way that Hungrybox was able to win so many tournaments, especially like in the late 2010s. Jeez, saying that feels weird, but that
yeah,
right. But then seeing Zane as well. And Martha's not like, it's in that medium range, but like a half floaty, I guess. Mostly floaty. I mean, I should pause. Is Martha floaty or not?
So like Melee doesn't have like exact weight categories, right? But like, I always think of Sheik and Marth, they're the semi-floaties, right?
Yeah, I like that.
They're definitely not floaty like Peach or Puff, but they're like, don't fall fast, you know, they're not heavy characters.
Right. And so I think about Zane as well, not rising to the top with a Fox or Falcon, but rising to the top and playing a better or as good or a better than any player in the pandemic time or the quarantine era, the online era, whichever we're calling it. And to your point, that then brings out the certain group of people who are very interested in calling it a 60-40 matchup between Marth and Fox and all that stuff. But I still love watching Marth, and I've really come to appreciate, I think specifically more since that Emperor Lemon documentary came out. Sure, people have problems with it or whatever, but I think that really helped to get me to sort of look at the floatier cast in Melee a little bit differently than how I used to, where I didn't necessarily understand, but then I started to get it more. So that video accomplished that at the very least, and it is a good video. You're absolutely right. I am remembering the question that I had for you earlier, where you were talking about...
Ooh, shoot.
Sorry, am I going too fast, or did you want to wrap up the floaty?
No, go ahead, shoot.
Sorry?
No, you're good. I just agree.
Okay, yes. I wanted to ask you about whether or not this scenario can exist, or if this is totally not real for you. When you are playing a match, playing a set, and you feel like you've established your will or the way that you want to play over the other person, where it's like it's half mind games, it's half the gameplay itself, but you still end up losing because whatever. Is that something that actually happens, or do you feel like you have to establish what you're trying to do on the screen and the mind game side of it in order to win? Like winning and the establishing your will have to happen. They both have to happen, or can it just be one or the other?
I think it can be one or the other, or like it's more often than not like a combination, right?
Right.
Like, some sets really like I'll be honest, I think some sets a person you'll like realize this player I'm fighting is more fundamentally sound at the game than I am, right? And you go, I need to find the one thing that they do not know how to deal with, right? Whatever one solution that might be. So a lot of that time it's like, oh, maybe kind of like in an older era, you would go, this person really is not going to beat me at the ledge, right? And you'll say, all right, I lose game 1. Game 2, though, I'm going to work hard, get my lead, and then be on the ledge, right? So, like, that's a circumstance where, like, asserting that situation, it is, like, pretty dominantly how you win. But more often than not, the idea is, like, a combination of, like, playing with those fundamentals and also, like, trying to make somebody scared that at any moment, you might just choose to turn off the interaction in the game. Like, and make them play at that tempo.
Yeah, I like that. And would in your own opinion, what would be your favorite matchup, either to play or to watch? And I know that's a hard question. I'm sorry.
No, you're cool. It changes a lot. I think my favorite is probably Marth. Probably Puff Marth.
Oh, that is so much fun to watch.
I really enjoy that matchup. There's just a lot of like unique rest setups you can do. I think it provides like the most insightful answer to like, I talked earlier and said like, oh, like the way I like to play is kind of hot and cold. I like to be able to like switch between really aggressive options and really like campy options. And that's a matchup that really feels like it rewards it. Like I have like a lot of like distinct player reads that I can feel like I can assert really well versus Marth players, or like things I know how to do to bait out certain actions from Marth players typically. So it makes the matchup feel very fun, and like I rarely feel like I play a Marth who I like can't figure out what they're looking for all the time, and then just figure out how to like abuse that thing. And that's really fun. Solving a match of Melee feels really fun to me.
Do you feel like there's a particular matchup that has been solved in your head and you go, oh yeah, okay, got this locked down, but then after a few weeks or after a few months you go, wait, what's happening? Have you ever had that feeling with a matchup before?
Kind of. I think like every Melee player, like it's probably a really good sign when you're like, if your hardest matchup was Falco and then you worked on it really hard and you go, you know what, maybe he's not my worst one anymore, maybe it's Sheik now. And then you work on that really hard and you solve it and you move on. Maybe it's Falcon now. Every time it changes, that probably shows that your like expectation of like what you need to be doing has raised enough to the point where your new weakness is showing. I never really feel like I solve a matchup, quote unquote. Like I try to improve at them, and sometimes I'll feel like, wow, I'm untouchable right now versus Fox, right? And then somebody will just prove that I'm wrong. And that's like exciting for me every time. Where I'll like run into some crazy good player, or like where I don't even know who it is, and it's like, whoa, this thing is a huge like wrench in what I'm trying to do. And then I have to like figure out how to add that to what I'm doing. But I never really feel like you solve a matchup. It feels more like you solve the match in the moment, right? Like,
and that's what it is.
Yeah,
it's a moment, but it goes by. It becomes history, and then it's on to the next one. But
yeah,
with you and competing and also trying to do everything else, one of the things that you said earlier that I thought was interesting, it's not interesting because it's bad or good either way. I'm saying it's interesting because you were talking about not enjoying or not enjoying as much the bigger side of Melee, the top players, super big tournaments. So I'm thinking of SCL in particular because we just had that wrap up, the 4 weeks of SCL action. You have so many things that you're trying to pay attention to. That's probably part of it, but is it the fact that you know the names of the people who are entering in the Pink Series tournaments, and when you're competing yourself, you like or prefer competing in the more of the local sense, West Coast only, or Washington State, or, well, I don't know if you still live in Washington State. You don't have to say, but is that your preference when you're competing or streaming in the Pink Series tournaments?
it's not that I like, okay. So my thought is like most fun Melee to watch for me is like when I kind of feel like it's a little more unpredictable, right? So like when you're watching a big tournament, right? Let's just think of like you're watching Genesis. Let's try to not use quarantine, right? You're watching Genesis. My favorite part to watch for a major every time, which I love watching, like land majors, right? I love watching like the second pools into like the top cut area, like maybe like top 24-ish, right? That's like my favorite area to watch Melee because I feel like I'm going to see a lot of like unique interactions between really unique playstyles. And the farther you go near the top of Melee, I feel like it hasn't always been like this, I guess, but like more as time goes, the people who are the best representatives of their characters tend to gravitate towards a couple of like the same options or like the same kind of things because the things are really, really good, right? And we see a little bit of difference in those styles, but like sometimes it feels a little predictable. So like a lot of time when I'm watching like a Summit Championship League thing, right? And I'm watching the end of it, I kind of knew before going in, like, here will be the top performers of it. And the two weekends ago, we saw Wizrobe kind of shockingly turn around and win it, right? But even though that's like that's the upset, that's the surprise, right? It's exciting, it's cool. It's not like that crazy though, right? Sometimes it's more fun to watch, for me to watch like the micro parts of Melee where like the Dreffin runs into the 5th best player in Arkansas. Like that's a cool match for me to watch. I'm like super invested in that. The top players, I'm like, they're cool, but like if I'm not super invested in those people or like something more about what that like storyline is, I don't know. It kind of loses me.
So it's not so much, well, it is partially the social aspect of it. Do you know the person behind the controller? Like, do you know them better than, or like as a mutual, or is it just more like, I know who that player is because I've seen them on stream before. I don't know them because I like have ever had a conversation with them or interacted with them online. But it's also about the predictable nature of a top 8 at a major, regardless if it's LAN or online. Sure, there will occasionally, to your point, be Wizrobes beating Mangoes. There will be those sets sometimes, but more often than not, it'll be someone like Zane in the modern era winning a tournament and winning it pretty convincingly. And in the past, it was Armada, HBox, before that, so on and so on. And I am interested in what you were saying about the not purely the beginning of pools, but sort of like that sweet spot of kind of in the middle, right before getting to top 16, sort of like the top between top 64 and top 24, something like that. Is there a specific set or match that comes to mind when I talk about some of the last majors that were IRL, like Big House 9 and Genesis 7, stuff like that you remember watching and getting really hyped about, or do none come to mind at this moment?
I mean, there are sets that come to mind, but I'm kind of like, I'm trying to think about absolutely how recent they were. I'm kind of bad at remembering which set happened at what tournament sometimes.
No worries.
I'm like,
I don't even know.
I remember, like, I can think of stuff where, like, my favorite kind of match to watch is and of course I'm trying to remember, I think it was Genesis, but I could just be wrong of whichever Genesis it was in the year. But I remember watching Zasa, the Puff player, fight Zio, the Captain Falcon player.
I don't know those names.
Both of them were solid, but they weren't like top 100 or anything yet. And I remember watching that match and going like, wow, this is really cool. Zasa had just gotten off of beating Kolbol like the match before that too. And I was like, this is cool. This is great Melee.
So that would be one example of one. I wonder if do you think that's like on YouTube somewhere, or is it just totally?
Oh, I'm sure.
Ooh.
It was streamed. It would be somewhere. I wonder if I can find it. Zasa Zio.
Because like it like when people mention specific sets I haven't seen before, when I had Brentos on a while back, Brentos is a big supporter of all Texas Melee players because that's where he's from as well, and he offhandedly mentioned Chandy versus Tafokins, and I was like, who's Chandy? And he's like, you don't know? And I'm like, well, I'm sorry, I'm not from Texas. And he's just like, well, a lot of people in Melee know the set, but here, I'll link it to you. And it was Chandy.
See, I think that's really cool. I found the set. It was actually DreamHack Atlanta 2017.
No worries. No worries.
I told you, I was like, I didn't remember how recent it really was, but that was the one that like really made me think about that.
If you could link it to me, that'd be super helpful. But anyway, when we're done, if that's more helpful to you while we continue to carry on that conversation. All right.
Yeah, totally.
I do love hearing about, and I think this is something that Melee Stats podcast is perfect for, because they will talk about any set that they remember seeing, even if it wasn't streamed. Like if one of them saw it, it seems to be locked and loaded at all times where they can just bring it up and remember specific things about it. And that's something that I admire so much, while also simultaneously going, I don't know if I could ever do that. So Melee Stats podcast is a good direction to go for people who are interested in hearing about the less heralded sets, the less known matchups that happen, and names that you may have never heard of. But when you're wanting to learn more about Melee, that's sort of the stage I'm in right now. It is really cool to hear about different stuff like that. So that'll be a match I'll be interested in checking out. But you were sort of talking about how there's a set or two that people may quote unquote know you from. Is that something that you really put a lot of thought into, to be like, oh, I have to play to a certain way for like how I've been cast as a player? Because we all sort of, especially for the top players, we think of Zane as playing in one way, we think of Mango as playing in another way, and so on down the line. Do you feel that at all, or do you feel totally relaxed about whoever's watching? It doesn't matter, you're just interested in competing?
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting question. I might think about it kind of the other way around sometimes, where like I'm not really like nervous like to be on a stream or like to be on a match that has viewers or whatever. I think what I think about, it may be weird, but like I'll sometimes try to like treat it the opposite way, where if I know I'm on like a stream match, I might intentionally play more like lame or whatever way I feel like is going to get in my opponent's head more. Like if I think that my opponent is going to feel like get nervous because I'm playing campy and they're on stream and like it looks silly for them,
right,
then I might do it, right?
Heck yeah. That would be that. Hey, that would get me all out of sorts, because I'd be like, oh gosh, I'm on stream. There's 12 people watching, and just letting someone just walk circles around me or fly circles around me, however you want to phrase it. That would totally get me at the very
What
least.
I actually think is like maybe more common than like trying to play campy when it happens. I wish there was like a better term for this, but like silly degenerate interactions in Melee that like you can kind of look like you're like a dummy for doing something goofy in Melee because of your opponent. Like, do you ever see those situations where somebody will like do like jab pressure on your shield like really slow, and there is real threat there, but like you feel silly when it works? I try to do that kind of stuff all the time.
I love that. Just to sort of like, you're really stretching the brain of the person who's competing across from you, because if they are, or whether you understand it before going into the set or not, if you've played them before or not, you're testing to see how much they're reacting to what's in front of them as compared to a pre-programmed set of actions that they sort of have in their brain of, I will go in and do this, I will go in and do that. The most famous example that I can think of is when PC Chris and Ken were playing in finals in these MLG tournaments back in the day, like way back in the day. And this was on the Samox documentary, the first one, where PC Chris was talking about, I was telling my brain not to do short hop laser into forward smash or short hop laser into a nair or a dare. But I just kept doing it because I couldn't tell my hands to stop in the middle of a set, in the middle of a tournament, like that sort of thing. It feels like that's what you want to do. You want to be like, hey, me, V, playing against you, the player, are you actually thinking about what you're doing right now? Because I'm going to test to see whether or not you're actually engaging your reaction brain or not, if that makes sense.
No, 100%. That's like exactly how I think about it. It's like, are you looking at the screen to see what's actually happening? And if not, I'm going to try to figure out where you don't, right?
I love that. That sounds very, very cool. I think I could vibe with that, but maybe I would also get impatient at the same time. Very exciting to see what kind of style or what kind of inclination of Melee processing I'm going to get into when I hopefully eventually someday compete. But back to you.
I always think about that, actually. Before I came, I always thought about, like, it's so interesting that, like, You still haven't entered a tournament, right? You haven't done an online tournament either,
No,
right?
I have no access to internet currently.
That stinks. I hope it is the most fun thing for you. You are in such an interesting, like, unique position to be, like, making Melee content and, like, engaging with some, like, pretty high-level players and, like, all sorts of different personalities in the community. And you're like, oh, I haven't really been to a tournament. Like, your first-hand experience is so different from others.
Yeah, it's sort of the angle, but also, like, I've wanted to do Melee stuff in general for a long time, but always been, for whatever reason, I didn't. And it chalk it up to being scared, more or less. Somewhat of an introverted person and just, like, doubting myself, I guess. Or, like, just, I sort of have that personality trait where, like, I'll just find any reason to, like, pick myself apart. So that's probably part of it, or at least a contributing factor. But all that to say, I'm excited to be even in the position that I am now, where I get to talk to people like you, have great insight into a game that I really truly do love. It's just I also, yes, my access to it at the moment is somewhat limited, but it's been really fun to talk about Melee with all kinds of people. To your point, it's been very fun. And to sort of get in the direction of wrapping up, I want to be respectful of your time here, is the why Melee question that we were sort of starting to get into, but I thought, wait, that is such a big question. I wanted to give you a little bit more time to sort of let that sit. But another way for me to try to phrase this is, throughout all this time, you've definitely seen and watched, played a lot of Melee, and there are unique things that happen occasionally, but I feel like in someone from your vantage point, it probably happens less and less. And although it's really cool when new things are discovered, like new tech, or you just see a new interaction you've never seen before where you go, wow, I've been playing this game for how long and I've truly never seen that before. Wow, that's awesome. That's crazy. But it feels like it might happen less and less. So in your vantage point, is that the case? Does that even matter to you in terms of why you continue to stick with Melee and to play Melee?
Yeah, truthfully, I don't really think that, like, Melee doesn't really feel like it has, like, this limit of where those interactions are. I think that's why it's so appealing to me. It feels like those interactions just get optimized, or they change, or they have all these things. But what's really cool about Melee is, like, all the different ways we can interact with it. Like, I know it's not everybody's thing, but, like, Melee singles, right? At the top level of Melee singles is, like, the Melee we think of when we talk about it. But there's Melee singles at the top. There's Melee singles, like, the stories that are formed, like, in local scenes, in, like, rivalries, in person-to-person things. I used to love those, Save as Untitled videos where it, like, talked about the storylines that we might see at tournaments.
Oh, yeah, those were great
really
videos.
Cool. But, like, that's, like, a good way of, like, thinking about it. It's, like, it's not always about, like, the Mango versus Zane again, right? Those are cool. They have their own things that are attached to them that are really big. But, like, your experience in Melee, or I speak for me, but I really speak for, like, what I think is so cool about Melee is that the experience of Melee is, like, as you are more involved, it's a game unlike any other I've really seen where, like, in order to engage with it, you kind of have to become social. You have to engage with people. And that will make your interaction and your attachment to everything you do so different. Like, I just want to say, like, think about this. Like, we're having this talk here today, right? We live on opposite sides of the country. And you know, the first time I ever see you go into your first major and you're on the stream and you're playing some really scary top 100 player, you know I'm going to lose it for you. Like, that's so cool. Like, that set won't have that interaction for other people necessarily, but it will for me. And, like, that concept in a million different ways is why Melee is so cool. And then we have doubles. Like, we have doubles Melee. We have volleyball that's becoming more relevant. I speedrun Target Test. Like,
ooh.
I just love the game, and there's so many different things inside of it that I don't really think we're not really anywhere near, like, the capacity of, like, all the interesting things this game has to offer us. Like, even in Melee singles. And then, like, we got all this other stuff. Like, who knows where we're gonna go with it.
It's going to be super cool. And V, I will be popping up for you as well. Oh my goodness. That would be very, very cool. We'll see if I can actually, traveling across the country for a major seems like a bit of a challenge as of right now, but we shall see. And
okay, for a local,
yes.
I'll see you on a local on Twitch and I'll go, I know them.
Like the Leonardo DiCaprio meme on the couch of being like, wait a minute. I know that person. Oh boy. Oh, you didn't need a little bit of help. But all that to say, I am excited to eventually be able to do online competitions at some point, and possibly a local or two as it becomes safe. Of course, you get it. And to summarize all this, I want to give you the red carpet, if you will. I try not to say that, but I find myself saying it a lot, and I feel like I'm stealing from Sean Evans. So shout out to Hot Ones, but please tell the people where they can find you, offer your closing thoughts, all that good stuff.
The best places to find me are like Twitter or that sort of stuff. I'm pretty much @catnamed_V on anything, or I'm @catnamedvirtue on anything that I would be on, I guess. I really only engage with like Twitter or Discord or whatever tournament you end up finding me through. Let's go and make people understand Lame Melee more and get what makes the game so cool and interesting. Let's unban wobbling, and yeah, that's where we're at.
V, thank you so much for joining me tonight on Bottom of Smash Mountain. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate being on here.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of Bottom of the Smash Mountain. Before you get going, please like the video. Where are you going? You left. Well, for those of you who are still here, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment your favorite part of the interview. Hey, is there a timestamps person that wants to post them? Because for now, the only thing that I'm doing for timestamps is the start of the interview and the end of the interview. You're welcome, YouTube. I couldn't be bothered. At least for now, I couldn't be bothered. So if you also want to listen to this podcast in its entirety, I have exclusive podcast audio that is separate from the audio that I post here onto YouTube. So if that's something that's interesting to you, you can check out Bottom of the Smash Mountain on your favorite podcasting platform. Seriously. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, all kinds of podcasts. So thank you for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.